Welcome to the show, Emma.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So let's start with kind of like hopefully the easy question. What made you want to become an author?
I think it might actually be the hardest question. No, I think, like a lot of writers, I started out by reading and I read a lot. And then I had three kids and I read even more because, something has to help you escape just every once in a while. And I really appreciated that. I appreciated that there was someone out there that was writing stories that I could dive into and that could give me a break. And I then started those characters that I would read about would start morphing into characters of my own. And finally, about a little over a year ago now, I guess, I just had these characters that wouldn't stop talking to me. And so I finally reached that point of I have to write them down. I have to see if I can do this. And I definitely went into it and from the thought of I'm going to try it and see if I can. It wasn't like know that I'm going to be a great writer and I just like have to share this with the world. It was more of I have these characters that need to get out of my brain and stop talking to me all the time. And so I gave it a try and I realized that I loved it and that it was fun and it was a great opportunity to learn a lot of new things. And so I kept going.
What has surprised you the most about the journey so far?
I've been really surprised with how supportive people in my life are. I am from a very small town. I currently live in a even smaller town. We're talking 250 people. And writing explicit romance, you could see it going either way. And people in both communities have just been so supportive of me and my journey. And really, it's been so fun to like learn how, a lot of times open door romance can get a bad rap and you think people are going to judge you for it. And it turns out that actually a lot of people are reading it. And even the ones who it's not their thing, which, is totally understandable, there's not a lot of judgment out there for it. And that has been just an amazing realization as an author and just as a reader of the genre.
So why do you like writing romance so much?
I think it's real life at its best, right? And don't get me wrong, I love fantasy. I honestly am not a big nonfiction fan. Like, if you're telling me a good story that I can escape to, I love it. But I think that romance is just real life. And, it specifically pulls on some of the messy side and then shows you how people got through it. And I think that there's a great learning lesson there, but it also makes you feel seen. You're like, I am, the miscommunication trope, as much as we all hate it when you're reading it, you're like, just talk to them. It's also real life. You're like, oh, no, my husband will definitely pick up on it. If I just leave that dirty dish sitting next to the sink, he'll know I'm mad. And you're like, so
He doesn't.
it's real life. He doesn't pick up on it. No, turns out you should communicate that with them, but we
Probably a
don't.
couple of times.
Yeah, like 7 to 52, I think.
So you're an indie author. What do you enjoy most about that?
I like the fact that I could find my fans quickly. I think that querying and going the traditional route is, it really makes you hone your pitch and yourself a lot faster. But I think the indie side of it is that you can put a book out there, and I truly believe that there is a audience for every book. There's someone out there who's going to love it as much as you do. But if you have those gatekeepers who are trying to make sure the masses are going to love it, it limits you as an author and it limits the readership, right, from getting those very specific ones that maybe aren't going to appeal to the wider audience, but are going to appeal to them so much. And so as an indie author, I like that I could find my people quickly. I didn't have to, wait for both the long process of traditional publishing, which my understanding is takes considerably longer than what the indies are pushing out, and but also didn't kind of have those gatekeepers to make sure that my books met, very specific needs of the readership. They could kind of be more my style.
I love that. What is the most difficult aspect of it?
Marketing. And if an indie author comes on here and they're not just like, or any author really comes on and it's like marketing and sales, like I am an introverted English major, like, and now you want me to like have a full marketing plan that includes social media, and if we're talking paid ads, and it's all, you come into it and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so it's a ton of learning. It's a ton of trial of and error. And I think, the real truth about what I'm learning about marketing is what works today might not work tomorrow. And it's so hard to trace those leads down the funnel and say like, okay, I know that this marketing is working because I got this sales or this, Kindle Unlimited page read 2 months from now because somebody was finishing another series or another book. And so tracking that, I'm the type of person that's like, I would like to have the data on it. I would like to know that if I spend this many hours creating a social media plan, that then that's going to translate into this many views, and this many views translates to this many reads or sales. And that is not how it works. And so I live in constant, you're constantly questioning everything and just trying to learn as much as you can while also, writing more books and trying to hone that craft. So,
And they're very different skill sets, right? Like the creativity to be an author, and then marketing is creative, but it's also very analytical when it comes to digital, and it's a different world.
yes, it is. And it's, like I said, I've definitely learned the most in that area, but it's not the most fun learning for me. If I got to choose where I was spending my time, that isn't where I would put it. But I do want to share my books with the world, and I recognize that to do that, you have to figure out marketing. So I'm trying.
Well, and I think I have 20 years of marketing experience. I would tell you that it doesn't matter the industry, what you explained, even having a degree in MBA and all this experience, it is every single day it's changing. What works in January isn't going to work today. And we all want like this perfect attribution that you were talking about. And it doesn't exist. It just doesn't.
Oh, come on, don't tell me that.
Right?
I thought if I learned more, I would get there.
No. I wish I could lie to you. It's so not true. Well, especially like in, I think, publishing, because oftentimes if you think about people's TBR list, like mine has like over 350 books on it currently. So I could see something, love it, add it to my TBR list. And it's just like when I get to that point where I'm ready to read that type of book, and that can be a week from now, it could be a year from now.
Exactly.
But it's probably because I saw something on TikTok or Instagram, or a friend told me about it. And it's like, I have no idea how you track something that has that long of a like buying or reading cycle.
Yes, it is. And just the the joke about the never ending TBR is so real. And so then it's not just getting it there, it's then reminding the reader enough times about it, them seeing it, that it somehow makes it to the top of that list. And, all you can do is try.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons why I love how a lot of, and you're doing this, right, with your Wild Bluff series, is they're kind of standalones, but they're also interconnected. And I think that is really compelling, because what I find myself is if I add a book to my TBR that's one like that's that style, and another one's coming out, I'm like, oh, I have to read the previous one before I get to that. So it almost kind of, your next book creates another incentive for me to read maybe the one I hadn't yet.
The interconnected standalones are one, just like my favorite, but from a marketing perspective, they do help with some of that. And no matter where people come into the series, they like the characters, right? Which does mean that you have to make likable and interesting side characters, which actually is my favorite part. every book, I'm like, oh, this side character, I should give them a story. And you're like, no, no, focus yourself. We have a trajectory here, but
That'll be the next book.
that'll be the next book. And but I really enjoy that aspect of it, and it does help. It does help with that portion of it is the interconnected series and the interconnected. Then you get a little bigger into the worlds where, you know, my dreams someday are to have offshoot series, but where you still have the characters where you're like, hey, this character came from this book. You should go check that one out. And I mean, that's how I read for sure. I'm
Same.
like, oh, I will. You have a 20 book backlist. You are my ideal author. Though as a new author, the challenge of that is you're like, how can I quickly as possible get a 20 book backlist while still having your books be high quality and interesting and all of the things.
And still having good mental health and a life and family time and all the other things.
Yes. Actually paying attention to my children and my husband and my full-time job that actually, you know, currently pays bills. So
All the things.
all the things, it's fine. Multitasking.
Right. So let's talk about your newest book, Wild and Free. How would you describe it in 10 words or less?
So for the people who are the like movie TV show fans, I would describe it as One Tree Hill meets The Hating Game. But if you're not, in you know, if movies and TV shows don't speak to you like that, I would go with small town romance about two rivals competing for the same big client, and the hijinks that ensue.
Very much so. So where did the idea for the book come from?
Well, to the interconnected series, Kelsey was in my first two books. She's sister slash boss in those ones, and I loved her. She's just such a strong character, and so I knew I needed to give her a strong storyline. I knew that her story needed to be one that still allowed her to be that tough, no-nonsense character. And I was like, competitive. That's what she is. She needs a rivalry, workplace rivalry. And, you have to look past the fact that this small town just happens to have two big competing security firms. That's, as someone who lives in small towns, not as realistic as you would like it to be, but we've all looked past that. It's fine.
We have.
And, I was like, that's what she needed, was she needed that competition in it. And so it kind of developed from there so that she could really show that competitive nature and bring out that kind of just strong, boss bitch energy that she gives.
Which I love. I love her character so much.
Thank you.
So how long did it take you to write this book?
So my first drafts took about 6 weeks to write. I try to write about 10 to 15,000 words a week is to kind of get to the roughly 90,000 that I'm shooting for. And so that part actually flows pretty quick, and I am a decently clean drafter in the sense that my brain works at about the same pace that I'm typing. So most of the words are there, most of the storyline is there, and but then it takes about another 2 months to 3 months to get it through all of the edits and proofreading and line edits and all of the fun that follows is definitely the larger time commitment.
So I know we've already talked about this, but it being part of that interconnected series, do you think readers need to read the first two books before reading this one?
In my second book, Wildly Inappropriate, to not answer your question, but answer it, the two main characters, Lila and JT, are discussing romance books, and they're discussing whether or not you should read them out of interconnected standalones out of order. And I fall into it's chaotic not to. Like, that's just a me personally choosing to start with book 3 in a series, even if they're just interconnected standalones, feels chaotic. Like my little pea brain is like, I'm sorry, what? Why would you ever do that? That said, I write them with the intent that you could pick it up anywhere. So I try my hardest, even though, these characters live in my head all the time. So I know information about them that nobody knows. But I try really hard to make it so that you don't have to have read the ones before it. I have had advanced readers who I do make sure that I have advanced readers who've never read the previous ones so that they can kind of provide some of that feedback on review sites and things, whether they felt that you could jump in there or not. And in general, the answer is you can, it definitely isn't going to detract from the story, but you're gonna like it a little bit more if you know the side characters, right? I intentionally bring the side, tie the whole group of the cast of characters throughout. And it's fun to like pick up, oh, they made a joke about back nine behavior in book 3, and that's, more explained in book 2. But one, it's one of those things where you're like, I kind of know what you're talking about. It's not detracting me from the story, but it might make me want to go read book 2 so that I fully get the joke. So the short answer to your question is, I think you are fine to start wherever you want to. If you haven't read the first 2 and you want to pick up Wild and Free because you love workplace rivalry and this is where you want to jump in, go for it. I don't think that you're missing out on anything, but don't be surprised when you then want to go back and read the first 2 to find out how those characters came to be.
I think that's very accurate. I found for myself on different types of interconnected, I've done both things where I've jumped in the middle and I've started from the beginning. And when I have jumped in the middle, I'm like, oh crap, I wish I would have, like, how did they get together? Why is that funny?
Right.
And then I end up reading everything else. So.
Yes.
So we talked about how it's unique that there are 2 rival security firms in this small town.
Yes.
And they not are just rival security firms, but they are competing for a massive security contract with a famous musician. So different echelon of security even.
Yes.
But it feels super authentic. So there wasn't anything about the story when I was reading it that I was like, oh, this seems not like it wouldn't be real. So how did you, I assume that like you don't have personal experience being a security contractor for famous musicians. How did you go about researching that role and like the various security related situations that happen in the book?
Yeah, I am not a security person in my day job, though I, would love to, especially now, I'm interested. So I did a lot of research. Google became my best friend. There are a couple of like security websites out there that have a lot of information about how people train or deal with certain situations, or that were helpful to me. I will also say in addition to the security, the like tour logistics and moving all of the equipment around and the number of, semi-trailers that it would take to move, all of those things. The Taylor Swift's Era Tour information was so helpful. I was like, oh, no, how many did she take? I'm like, basically, the tour that you see in Wild and Free is very much so like, not the same stops, not the same things, but I'm like, what would Taylor do? And then we would find out, and that helped a lot with it. And some of the security, like how does the security team work? How do they interact with the concert venues, like personal security team, right? Because as you're like walking through metal detectors, those aren't Taylor Swift's people that are there checking in and things like that. And so I learned a lot from. There's some very interesting podcasts and videos and things out there on her whole tour. And so that was also very useful.
It's funny that you mentioned that when they were talking about in the book about having two stages in shipping. I was like, that's what the Eras Tours did. I don't think that's, and I was like, I wonder if that's normal for other shows or if it's just for like these massive productions. But that was my
Yes.
first thought.
Yes, and I think it depends on how quickly they're trying to move them in between. But in general, most of them, especially once you start talking about international tours where they're having to cross the oceans, you your travel time starts taking a lot longer. And I will say, my barge movement time may have been compressed a time or two to get some stages across the world.
Awesome. So one of the things I loved was there is fun banter among all of the characters in the book, Carter and Kelsey, and then specifically Kelsey and her siblings. How do you come up, without being spoilering anything, how do you come up with some of these ideas for the conversations that occur?
I'm lucky to have a lot of witty people in my life. I have siblings of my own, and I would say there's a lot of banter taking place between us. So there's definitely times where someone says something. I like it most when it's me, when I'm like, oh yeah, that was a good one. I'm going to write that down. But really, I'll take anybody's good ideas and, write it down. I'm like, that might fit into a conversation somewhere, and take notes on it. The other thing is, how sometimes you're having conversations with someone and like a minute after the fact, you're like, oh, I have a really good, can we go back to that? Like, I would like to say something witty right here. But the time has passed. But the great thing about writing is you're like, I can come back to this. You're like, I know there's a witty response here. And, I'll just like leave myself a comment, insert witty response here. And then I get a few days to like think about what that might be. And I just talk to myself a lot. There's a lot of just sitting at my computer saying, and then I'll try something out. Like, that's not as funny as I wanted it to be. And so I'll try something else out. And but I think in general, I grew up with a family who quick wit is part of who we are. And we like that banter back and forth. And so it felt, especially between the siblings, between the sisters, it feels really natural for me for that to be how they communicate with each other.
So on the flip side, one of the other subplots we have is Carter's mom has dementia, and it really has a tremendous impact on various aspects of his life. Why did you feel like that was important to include in the story? And what do you hope readers will learn from it?
Yeah. So I have a grandmother who has dementia and recently has moved into a care facility and her dementia is really accelerated. And I'm very fortunate that I am not the person that is her primary caregiver, but my parents and my dad's siblings are. And it takes a lot out of them. It's so hard emotionally. The amount of decisions that you have to make on someone else's behalf is challenging, and you relive those conversations, the tough conversations that we're like, all right, you got it done with. You're not done with it. You get to continue to explain where they are and how they got there and what they're doing over and over, right? And as I've been going through that with my family, I've actually had a number of friends or other family members share similar stories, right? Or they're going through the same thing with parents or grandparents. And I think a lot of times it's pretty isolating because you are so fortunate that that person is still there with you physically, but you've lost a lot of what you used to love about them, right? That the the mental connection that you had with them is challenging to find, or some days you never know if it's going to be there or not. And so I wanted to put a character there that people could see themselves in so that they wouldn't so they would know they're not alone in dealing with this very challenging situation that, some people, like Carter's mom, deal with it with humor, right? People, even in the story, like, are we joking about, is this a laughing matter? And she's sort of like, this is my, how I'm choosing to deal with this diagnosis. And, but sometimes it's hard, and sometimes it feels like a burden, even though would never want, that person is not a burden, but it can feel that way. And so I wanted people to feel seen in it, in whatever, way that it is impacting their life.
Well, and that's one of the things I enjoyed about it. So, my grandma was passed, but she had Alzheimer's. And then my co-host on the podcast, Megan, her father has Alzheimer's, and he's relatively young. And so we both love it when there are stories that not just have a character with some sort of medical condition in there, but where it feels very authentic to like every aspect of their life. So it was really easy for me to relate to like what Carter was going through, the things that he said or felt, or that constant like fear he has, like should I come home, like based on like little things that are happening. And there are some days, if you've ever, obviously you have dealt with dementia or Alzheimer's, where it's like they're the same person they used to be, and then the next minute they're not, and you cannot predict it. And it's really hard, I think, emotionally for everyone in the family and friends that are impacted, because it does impact every aspect of your life and the future that you had planned with them in it.
Exactly.
So I love that you're showing that. And I love that you showed it in a way that was realistic. It was also, I think, very clear that like Carter needed to take care of himself first, because that's something I think a lot of caregivers struggle with. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad that it felt real to you. And I will say, I really appreciate that you brought up that last point about Carter kind of having to learn that he needed to take care of himself and make sure that his life was still moving forward. And he couldn't just, stop and wait for his mom to not need him anymore, to focus on himself. Because I do think, especially, caregivers of anyone, whether that's, of small children, of parents with dementia, with, family members, or even, friends, others with, who they're giving care to, you have to fill your own cup first. And sometimes that doesn't feel good initially, right? It feels selfish, but really you have to be that little bit selfish so that you can continue to give.
Agreed. So one of the things that we do is we jump back and forth between Carter and Kelsey's point of view. How do you determine which point of view you use for a chapter?
I start when I outline my book, and I pretty much outline chapter by chapter, who the point of view is going to be, and then what's going to happen in it, in the sense of like one sentence, or sometimes it's like sexy time or something, as general as that. And then so it's not a hard and fast, like well outlined, but I do have a general sense of who's the point of view going to be, and what's the main thing that's happening in that chapter. And I follow it some of the time. But I start, and every other chapter, I decide who I want to start out with, and it's just every other chapter. And then as I build out the outline, sometimes I know at that point, I'm like, that chapter is not going to be best from their point of view. And what I'm really looking at there is either whose brain do we need to be inside of at this point, right? Like, whose internal monologue do we need to get a piece of to really understand what's happening? Or what information am I trying to keep from the reader at this point, right? So sometimes you're building some of that tension or suspense by not letting them see inside one of the characters' heads. Or sometimes you're like you're creating the tension between them by saying like, oh, you guys are actually thinking the same thing, or you think he's thinking this and he's actually thinking something else. And so then I'll go through at that, at the outline stage and change up some of those. So it's not just every other one. And then as I'm writing, I've multiple times gotten to a chapter, started it in one point of view, and I'm like, ugh, this doesn't feel right, or it's not going to hit the way I want it to coming from this person's perspective if I switch it over. What I actually find the hardest is sometimes I want to write the same scene from both people's point of view. And that does not work in romance. Romantasy, we accommodate for that a little bit more. Sometimes you timelines jump a little bit more, and so you can see some crossover. But with romance, we, as a readership, we typically don't expect that. And when, as an author, if you give readers something that they're really not expecting, it pulls them out of the story. And then you're like, wait, didn't I just read this? And so then you're going back and forth. And that is what I try to avoid as an author is pulling people to the point where you're like flipping back and forth, whether that's, people's names or the color of their socks, or, when your brain triggers on something and you're like, oh, now I have to go back and find out what we're talking about. And ideal situation is the reader, everything just flows so nicely that the reader starts and they keep going well past 2 a.m. and they, finish that book and never go back because it all just, nothing triggered their brain enough to have to jump back.
Well, and I think those are the types of chapters that are great for like a bonus, like a
Yes.
bonus chapter or something for like your newsletter subscribers or things like that, where, hey, like you probably want to also hear this on this person's point of view. Here it is.
You're right. Yes.
So we love spicy scenes on this show. How do you determine when and how much spice to include?
That's a great question. And I think I had to start determining how much spice before I ever started writing, right? It was I'm going to write a book and I know I want it to be a romance, but where are we going to fall on this scale as a writer? And I think, you have to establish that pretty early on so that you can, again, meet the reader's expectations, and you're kind of committing yourself, at least for the series, right? If you have, again, in romance, if you start book 1 and it's closed door, you better not have a, super spicy book 4, because your readership is not prepared for that. And in romance, you're not typically getting the same readers. Again, romantasy, a little different, where you can slow burn that and have the build up. But with straight romance, you're pretty well committed for a series, at least, if not everything that you write under that name. But so that was the first, and honestly, it was a harder decision than I thought. What I write is what I read. And that's where I ended up. But I'm from a small town. I, knew my parents were going to read this. There was definitely a question in my mind of like, I know that I mostly read open door romance, but should I write closed door if that's what I'm more comfortable with other people reading of my work? And should I, what is this going to mean for my children as they grow up, knowing that their classmates' parents, all of the, people have read my sex scenes, right?
Yep.
And I, chatted with my husband about it, because one of the things that I find very interesting as a romance author is everyone knows I made up these stories, right? This is fiction. No one comes up to me and is like, oh my gosh, are you married to a professional golfer? Like, no, like everyone knows that part is fiction. But then so they're like, so how does your husband feel about you writing about your sex life? And I'm like, why of all of the, like, it's all fiction. But no, I just like word for word wrote down, like what happened in the bedroom last night. Like, that's not how it works.
Why do people feel that they can ask authors those questions? Like, oh my goodness.
Right. Right. And so it's but I've always found that interesting. Like we recognize that the other 90% of the book is purely fictional, but that part is that nonfiction? Like, nope, nope, also fiction. Um but I knew that I did need to, include my husband in that decision just because that is the assumption that would be made by a lot of people. And so he fortunately has been very supportive of my author career and the path that I chose. And, we really came to the conclusion of like, I write what you love. And if it's not what you read, if it's not what you prefer, then why would you spend the time writing? And that's not to say, of course, that I don't read closed door romances. I think that there's actually a lot to learn as an open door romance writer from the closed door about some of that tension building because they aren't, showing the explosion. Like, how do you build some of that want and need and then deliver with the door closed? So I do think there's a lot to learn there, but it wasn't where I decided to go with it, just based off of my preference, really, reading preferences. So then we got, each book, some of it depends on the characters. My Wildly Inappropriate, which is the second book, it's a little bit more sexy, I guess, in terms of like number of scenes and explicitness of the scenes themselves. And those characters are just more open as people, right? And there is more kind of fiery passion between, it isn't, enemies to lovers. So there's a little bit more of that fiery passion between them. And so I think you see that a bit more in those scenes, and throughout the book, it pulls on that passion of the characters versus in Wild and Free, where those characters are a little bit more of the reserved type. I think you see, the sex scenes are a little bit more reserved. They're a little bit more about dominance and, giving up control or taking control than they necessarily are about like explosive passion scenes. And so really a lot of it has to do with where I feel like it fits for the characters and the storyline.
I love that. So, what is your favorite line or passage from the book and why?
So Carter says, "You're not in my future, you are my future. If you're not at the center of it, then it can't be my future." And that one really speaks to me because it's that commitment that he has and that Carter as a character has of, you are the thing that is going to make it my future, and I'm not willing to accept one that doesn't have you in it. And I think that it's just as someone who is married, I recognize that like some days it is a commitment, right? Like it's hard and you're here and you have to say like, I am here and I'm staying here because you are my future. But today you're really annoying me. And I think that's where, and that's why that line really speaks to me, is just like he's committed and he recognizes that there are going to be hard days, but they'll make the change so that their future includes each other.
Well, and I think it's so important. I love that when I read it because without sharing anything about Kelsey's backstory, like I think it's even more meaningful knowing like what she's been through.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. Carter as a character, I think, is so aware of her background and how it impacts her decisions that she makes in the present, and almost to a fault, right? But that is Carter, right? He cares almost to a fault. And I think we've all been there before, where it's like we're all big, we're all grown ups, we can all make our own decisions, and like give me the, tell me what you want so that I can make my decision based off of that. Don't try to make a decision for me just because you think you know what I want.
Is part of the book to write.
Kelsey. I think that partially because I had gotten to write her in books 1 and 2, and so I kind of had a feel for her. But it truly is just like she knows herself so well that I felt like I could really understand how she would react just because she is this like very solid character. And so writing her portions of it, I always felt like I knew exactly how she was going to respond to things. Not because that's who I am as a person. I'm about the most indecisive person you've ever met, but because she just felt like such a well-defined character by this point that she just flowed really easily for me.
So what was the hardest part to write?
I think the tour logistics were, and to be fair, I think I focused on them more than was necessary. But I had that full tour planned, all of the stops, what the name of each, arena or stadium was called. I had,
Restaurants?
yes, the restaurants that were nearby. For me, it's always very difficult for me to decide when I need to use a real place or when I can use a real location versus when I need to make one up. And part of that is like the legality of writing, that if I wasn't self-published, I would probably message an editor and be like, hey, can you help me understand this? But instead I'm deciding on my own. And so if there's anything that I feel like could possibly be negatively construed about the place, right, like a security breach or something like that, I always went with I'm going to make up a name, or, even something like Carter's credit card getting declined at a restaurant. It's like fake name, it's something that is slightly negative that occurred. Like, let's just make it a fake place. But I also like it when, you're reading things and like, oh, I've been there, or like, I know what this is. I can picture it because I've seen it. And so I prefer to use real locations, which again, so then finding the logistics of a tour and all the places they're going around it, I'm on Google Maps and like, okay, where could they walk to a restaurant? Where would the restaurants be? I had one very helpful advanced reader message me about like what they do, like that they don't use the term downtown in Melbourne, Australia. And I was like, oh, like I didn't know, you know what I mean?
That.
I didn't know. So some of those things where, again, most people it doesn't bother them. They're not going to notice either way. But for those readers who have been there or, know that place, making sure that it holds true enough, that it's real, that when possible, I'm pulling in locations and colors and all of the things that are truly there so they can feel that connection. But also that what I'm using is correct so that it doesn't pull readers out of the story by being like, well, that's not true.
So last question, what are you planning to write next?
Izzy's story. So, yes, yay. It'll be book 4 of the Wild Bluff series. It will focus on the final remaining Harper sister, Izzy, and for anyone who has read Wild and Free, they will not be disappointed with who the main male character is.
That's what I was hoping you'd say. Because I was dying in that book. I was like, I hope we're going to get another book. I hope it's these characters.
Yes, and then my evil plan has been accomplished. But yes, no, I will say writing Wild and Free, I was like, oh, like Izzy's story was just like popping out of my head as I was writing it. I have a few chapters already done that like I wrote. I had to stop writing Wild and Free to go and start writing chapters of Izzy's book. I was like, these characters are just writing themselves right now. But now that we're there, if I can be honest, I'm feeling a little trepidation. Like their story is the one that like I have been building to in, I guess, my heart and in the series. You know, you kind of see them splattered throughout, and I'm like, oh gosh, I've got to do them justice. And so it is a little intimidating, like the pen to page. Some days I'm like, but what if it's terrible? And I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure.
Or what if it's
great?
Extraordinary?
Or what if it's extraordinary? You are so right. And I think it will be. And truly, they really are. They want to write. They're like, excuse me, can you please start writing us again?
It's
I'm like,
time.
guys, I'm marketing over here. Do you know that my book releases in 5 days? And they're like, yes, we do. But if you could focus on us, that would be great. So I am really excited about it. But there is that little bit of, more so than I've had with any of the other books, that little bit of, oh man, I really have to do these guys justice.
I think you will.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Late Night Reads. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Late Night Reads Podcast. And check out latenightreads.com for even more information about all the books we're reading. If you loved today's episode, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. And share the show with your fellow book lovers.